While many of our members made progress on our 2020 goal to achieve zero net deforestation, we have learned that taking action on individual supply chains alone does not drive the transformation needed to achieve a forest-positive future. In 2010, our strategy was rooted in remediating individual company supply chains, often through certification, ensuring that the sourcing of key commodities would not deplete tropical rainforests. As a result of the hard work and investments our members have made in their supply chains, we have learned that certification plays a critical role, but it's not the only answer.
Forests are disappearing at an alarming rate, and commodities from converted lands and local economic incentives are exacerbating this global issue. As the world's leading consumer goods companies, we understand the urgency of the situation. Halting deforestation is a challenge that is still ahead of us. But now is the time for us to build a forest-positive future. Such an immense, impactful challenge requires collective action, and that's why we united our forces within the CGF. We share a long-term vision, and we are ready to take swift action. Working together, we can influence the wider supply chain. We can challenge traders, farmers, suppliers, service providers, and we can create new market practices.
To achieve a forest-positive future, we need an approach that drives groundbreaking impact in key landscapes through multi-stakeholder partnerships. We need greater transparency and engagement across each and every part of our supply chains, and we must be more agile to maximize our effectiveness. In response to this challenge, the Consumer Goods Forum has created the Forest Positive Coalition of Action. Our coalition is led by 17 companies with a combined market value of almost $2 trillion. Companies that are truly committed to leveraging collective action and accelerating systemic efforts to remove deforestation, forest degradation, and conversion from key commodity supply chains. Building on the previous work of the coalition members, we will take action in 4 critical areas. 1. We will engage with suppliers and traders and ask that they implement forest-positive commitments across their entire commodity operations. 2. We will join forces to address forest conservation challenges in key production landscapes. 3. We will engage governments and stakeholders to create an enabling environment for forest conservation. And 4. We will ensure transparency and accountability by regularly reporting on progress.
Our coalition is committed to playing a leading role in the fight against deforestation, and in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis, we must ensure that efforts to protect the forests are part of the global response.
This means we must all agree that forest protection is not a sacrifice to growth, but in fact a driver of economic growth. And crucially, this will also sustain healthy ecosystems and support productive landscapes and resilient communities.
This response requires all actors who are committed to being part of the solution to take action. We need governments, suppliers, retailers, manufacturers, investors, partners, NGOs, and consumers to join us and work together to achieve a forest-positive future.
At the CGF, we are committed to supporting forest-positive businesses.
We are committed to becoming a forest-positive business.
We are committed to becoming a forest-positive business.
Good morning and good afternoon to those of you joining from Europe, and good evening to those of you in Asia. I am Chris Montenegro McGrath, Vice President and Chief of Global Impact, Sustainability, and Wellbeing at Mondelez International, and co-chair of the Consumer Good Forum's Forest Positive Coalition, helping to drive the coalition agenda alongside Bertrand, who you will hear from next. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's session, introducing the Forest Positive Coalition. You have just heard the announcement from the CGF board's co-sponsors of the coalition, Alexandre Bompard, CEO of Carrefour, and Grant Reed, President and CEO of Mars Incorporated, as well as Wai Chan Chan, the new Managing Director of the Consumer Goods Forum, officially launching our coalition. This is a defining moment for the consumer goods industry's forest positive agenda. And our panel discussion today not only marks the launch of the coalition, but of a greater conversation about the crucial role the industry can play in creating a forest positive future. But before we get to that, let me hand over to Bertrand.
Thank you, Chris, and hello everyone. I am Bertrand Zulierski, Sustainability Director of Carrefour Group, and the other co-chair of the Forest Positive Coalition of Action. I would just like to take a moment to reiterate the importance of today's event and the importance of having you involved today. Today, we will be exploring the objectives of the coalition and its new roadmaps for producing forest-positive palm oil, soy, and paper, pulp, and fire-based packaging. In addition, we will also highlight how the coalition will improve private sector transparency and engagement with key stakeholders from civil society, governments, and the investment community. Some of those in our audience today have already been involved in our stakeholder engagement exercise during the last 6 months. So they may already be familiar with some of what we discussed in our session today. For those of you who are just learning about our coalition, we hope that today's session will drive home our ambition and commitment to taking collective action to create a forest-positive future. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator, Justin Adams. Justin is Executive Director of the Tropical Forest Alliance, and someone I'm sure many of you will know. Good morning, Justin.
Bertrand, thank you so much. Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody to this session. We're going to have a great panel discussion. We've got 3 great speakers, but I want to start by congratulating the Consumer Goods Forum and the 17 member companies for the launch of this coalition. The Tropical Forest Alliance was set up to support the Consumer Goods Forum to advance their action on stopping deforestation, and I know how much effort has gone into the launch today. We are also sitting, though, at a paradox, because, of course, this is the year of 2020, when the original commitment set back in 2010 was around how we were going to eliminate deforestation from supply chains. And we have to acknowledge that today we still are seeing a huge amount of forest loss every year, 3.8 million hectares still lost every year, and a large amount of that is still commodities that are driving that loss. But that masks the action that many individual companies have taken. And the great strides that have been taken, and we're going to hear from some of the leading companies today. We've already heard from Bertrand from Carrefour, from Chris from Mondelez, and we're about to hear from Unilever and Walmart. These companies are taking individual action, but we have all learned that individual action is insufficient. And that's why I am so excited to hear and learn more of what this coalition of action is going to do and how we can mobilize more of the collective action to drive more systemic change to advance this agenda together in the years ahead. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce the panel. We have Gita Siarian from Indonesia, who is joining us. She brings a critical perspective. She is the Executive Director of the LTKL. I'm delighted to also then welcome Arjun Both, the Senior Vice President for Global Sourcing for Walmart, and Dave Ingram, who is the Chief Procurement Officer from Unilever. So we're going to hear from each of you. And I want to start by asking all of you, what does the Forest Positive Coalition, what does that actually mean to you and your companies? So maybe if we start with Arjun.
Sure. So at Walmart, we define Forest Positive as supporting healthy forests, because healthy forests sustain biodiversity, support livelihoods, and play an important role in mitigating climate change. So question is how do we get there? We focus on priority regions. We work with suppliers on certifications and support suppliers' efforts at sustainable sourcing. And we promote collaboration and advocate for effective policy. So you will hear this from me a lot today, Justin. We must act collaboratively. No company or organization can do this alone. Forest Positive also means for us looking beyond our direct supply chain. Just yesterday, as some of you noticed, we announced a major commitment to protect, manage, or restore at least 15 million acres and 1 million square miles of ocean. This will include the efforts of Walmart, our suppliers, and philanthropy. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Arjan. So yeah, we see it in 4 ways, not massively dissimilar. Firstly, and importantly for us, it's about ensuring that we completely end our contribution to deforestation and the conversion of natural ecosystems as soon as possible. We put a hard deadline of 2023 on that, and we strongly believe that technology is going to be a significant driver to help us accelerate that. Secondly, it's about starting to build a positive impact on natural ecosystems. We recently announced a shift to an open source regenerative agricultural program, and that between now and 2030, our brands will collectively invest just over €1 billion in a dedicated climate and nature fund. This will include projects that will restore and regenerate degraded landscapes. Thirdly, we won't tackle deforestation effectively without really engaging the stewards of the land, engaging smallholder farmers and the reasons why they deforest land. We've got big ambitions to empower the smallholder farmers that are a critical part of our supply chain through inclusion, legalization, and productivity improvements. And finally, for us, being forest positive, is also about making sure that the people who work in, around, or impacted by our supply chain are treated fairly. This means the eradication of human rights issues and forced labor, improved working conditions, and the safeguarding of land and community rights. All of these are really important to us.
Super. And to Gita, what does this mean in a critical forest country like Indonesia, working on the ground with the communities and the district governors?
Yeah, thank you. So just a little brief explanation about what LTKL, or the Sustainable Districts Association, is for those of you who just first heard of us. We are an association of local government in Indonesia, and this association is also pushing for sustainable development on the ground through tangible means. And that's why we're partnering with the Tropical Forest Alliance, and a lot of excitement from our side to actually be hearing this new roadmap and strategy of the CGF. In terms of defining forest positive business coming from the local government's perspective, there are probably threefold that we'd like to highlight. First and foremost, we believe that forest positive business represent companies that translate forest protection as equal to people's right protection. Not only the smallholders, but as well as the local community, indigenous people, and the small, medium scale industries. The second part is that forest positive business represent companies that does not only care about reaching certain targets, but also about the process that they took to actually achieve those targets, including whether the right stakeholders are already at the table. Now, the third component of forest positive business from our side is we think about this as representative of company who places sustainability, including forest protection scenario, as part of their business model. And they see it as an opportunity to thrive, to benefit from, and not as a burden. They are willing to act now, and they are willing to act consistently, investing resources being involved in the process and incentivizing sustainable behaviors, both progress on targets as well as process, despite the possible long and challenging road ahead.
Thank you so much, Geeta. So there you've heard a few initial reflections on what forest positive means. I think we're going to hear a lot more about that moving forward. But we're now going to break into three sections, what we're going to just cover quickly. Firstly, the coalition strategy, then to talk about the commodity roadmaps, the specific commodities, and thirdly, just to talk about collaboration. So as we start out on the coalition that we've heard about getting set up today, could you talk to us, and again, I'll go Arjun, Dave, in that order. Could you talk to us about the importance of what you've learned of individual action and why now collective action and this coalition becomes so important? Dave.
Yeah, so look, I think the real power is that individually as companies we can have a certain degree of impact, but collectively we are much stronger. I think collectively as an industry body, but as our co-sponsors were saying at the start, collectively with NGOs, with governments, with a full ecosystem of people around us, we can be much, much more impactful. And we can really drive the changes that need to happen. Changes in terms of knowing sources, changes in terms of technology, releasing benefits with scale here are really going to drive the benefits. So that collaboration can make an enormous difference.
Great. Arjun, do you want to build on that?
Just give me 1 sec, please. Go to Geeta. Sorry about that.
So Geeta, you've seen the work that has been done by the individual companies in the landscapes you're working in. What could you tell us about how collective action could make a real difference?
Yeah, I think the most important critical part of what we're already experiencing in different landscape, like in Riau, West Kalimantan, South Sumatra, different part of Indonesia, working with companies like PepsiCo, the Unilevers, GAR, and Musimas, is what is most important is to set shared targets, shared contribution, shared process, and also shared claims in the beginning of the process. So at the end of the day, when you talk about collaboration, Justin, it's not necessarily about only focusing on your own KPI, be it from the government perspective or the private sector perspective. It needs to be a jurisdictional lens coming from everybody, you know, potentially conflicting interest. It is what it is. It's a process that needs to happen. And that's the only way that real collaboration in terms of long-term continuous journey can happen. Now, we recognize the progress right now in our jurisdictions are a bit, we're still trying to figure out the governance of it all, but we really see example where when local champions are being empowered, when they are able to actually set up the collaboration governance system, such as what's happening in Aceh Tamiang, for example, they're inventing this new Center of Agriculture Excellence that represent multi-stakeholders decision-making. This is when the actual partnership thrive. So building on trust coming from local and external partners is really the way to go in terms of pushing for collaboration ahead.
Very good. So I'm going to move to the next question, which is the
back there, Justin. Sorry about that. So this is about, you know, that in Walmart we recognize that that the retail industry as a whole cannot stop deforestation by taking a singular approach. So challenges range from local policies to supply and demand and traceability. So we believe that these challenges require new approaches at jurisdictional, landscape, and producer levels that drive results on the ground by engaging governments, non-profit producers, and other companies. So we really recognize the need to work collaboratively.
Very good. So thank you so much for that. That's about collective action. The first pillar of the new coalition strategy is about how you engage on your full supply chain to support deforestation. So that again builds on the lessons you've learned. But I wonder if I can turn to Dave to talk about how you are now engaging across your full supply chain, what this new coalition strategy means for you, and how this will build on the earlier initiatives and interventions you've taken, and the limits of where you found that to date.
Yeah, look, I think firstly we need to just recognise that the previous net deforestation resolution applied to all the CGF member companies. On paper, this sort of did look impressive at the time. Only a small number were actually embedding this into their sustainability commitments and thus implementing it. This is different. It is, as we said, only 17 companies at the moment. Individually, we are large in terms of our impact, with significant commodity footprints and therefore commercial influence. And we are a coalition of people who want to do the right thing. We're the coalition of the winning, with real appetite for seeing a difference and change and driving collective influence. What's more, when companies acted previously, it tended to be focused on narrow supply chain interventions, which assumed a future where there would be both acceptable and unacceptable business practicing. And that's not just good enough anymore. Our strategy is now focused on promoting transformative change, where business practices become the norm. We're also importantly, and this is a common message from our perspective, establishing a clear and transparent process that will set both short and long-term milestones and measure progress along the way. This allows us to be more agile and correct our course if and when we need to do so.
Thank you, Dave. And Arjun, the same question to you in terms of whole of supply chain action now.
Yeah, so once again, we believe that the business should work collaboratively with this government, governments on serious issues like climate change and nature loss, public policies that align with our sustainable supply chain priorities and that are environmentally effective and sustain economic growth. So we're going to do this either directly with governments or through industry associations and multilateral organizations. So, for example, to create enabling policy environment for climate action that also supports economic prosperity. We have, advocated for country engagement, business roundtable calls for US national climate policy. So our commitments to zero waste and achieving a zero circular economy have motivated us to endorse consumer goods forum global principles. So it's all about, working collaboratively with all the stakeholders in the supply chain. And this is not going to be just vertical, but also more and more horizontal, like we do today in the CGF.
Wonderful. And I just want to acknowledge as well that I think if we had this conversation even a couple of years ago, we'd be having the conversation just with chief sustainability officers, and what we have today is the chief procurement officers, and the engagement of those procurement commercial functions in these companies, I think, is one of the things that really gives me hope in terms of the power of this coalition moving forward. So we're now going to turn to the second section around the commodity roadmaps. And the co-chairs have already stated one of the objectives is to transform your business through the implementation of these commodity roadmaps. These have been consulted on palm oil, soy, and pulp paper packaging. And again, I'll turn to the businesses first. And so maybe Dave, to you, could you outline how the roadmaps have been developed to reflect the specific realities for the commodities that you're sourcing throughout your business?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. So yeah, as you say, the roadmaps have been developed to reflect those specific realities and challenges of each commodity. And the members that have the most significant quantities in those will focus on those because they understand them and the nuances best amongst us. However, they all have a consistent substructure. Each roadmap is built around 5 main elements that combine action both within and beyond their supply chains. These elements are firstly managing individual supply chains, ensuring that members' own supply chains meet the roadmap commitments. Secondly, working with suppliers, engaging our collective supplier base to promote the implementation of the roadmap commitments across their entire commodity operations. Third, monitoring the production base, working together to enable us to identify and respond to deforestation and conversion as quickly and as effectively as possible. Fourth, engaging in landscapes, working collaboratively to support forest conservation and restoration, as well as positive outcomes for communities in key commodity landscapes. And lastly, promoting transparency and accountability, committing to regular reporting on agreed upon indicators. Each of these 5 elements include commitments that all members agree to achieve. Actions, both individual and collective, that members will implement, and key performance indicators on which members agree to report to be transparent about their progress.
Thank you, Dave. And we want to dig in on one of those elements, the 5 elements you just outlined really clearly. But one of those elements in the roadmaps is, to what extent you're going to be thinking of existing landscape and jurisdictional projects to ensure an industry-wide approach. And Arjun, I wonder if you could provide some perspective on that from Walmart.
Yeah, sure. So give me an example. Let's give an example in this area, right? So let's take palm oil. We have started to source RSPO segregated certified palm oil in our private brands. And in fact, that's an example where we are collaborating with our suppliers through CGF and also OB2B and others. So this is, I think, a great example where we are moving forward in creating a better world, working with our stakeholders. If I may also give another great example, with is the project Kikaton. I mean, we launched that about 2 years ago, which is a great landscape example, where we are creating pathways for suppliers to report progress and efforts in areas of the world most prone of deforestation. And it's interesting to see that now, this gives us a lot of hope for the future, that 2,300 suppliers have signed up for removing, 230 million metric ton of greenhouse emissions. And this is just the effect after 2 years. So I think that's a great example that, working together with suppliers, setting bold targets can work. And again, it's all about collaboration. For promoting transparency and accountability, obviously, we will annually report that through our G report. So we're making great progress in this area.
Very, very good. Thank you. And again, congratulations on the announcement from your CEO yesterday, which I think is very significant and supportive of the coalition overall. So Gita, you work a lot with palm, a lot with smallholders in Indonesia. How do these commodity roadmaps, how do you see them touching the ground and advancing the agenda in the forest?
I think I agree with most of what Arjun and David have communicated. However, from our perspective, the 5 elements under the current roadmap is actually a part of one bigger umbrella. And we should look at it as part of an integrated landscape management that was also quoted in the strategy, the CGF strategy. This means that it does not replace existing supply chain effort that many companies are already progressing. It should rather complement it with stronger stakeholder support as well as permanence through policy. Now, again, at the implementation level, we have to be critical about how regional specificity comes into play. We cannot stress enough importance to be sensitive towards existing vision of local stakeholders on the ground. The land users in your high priority jurisdictions coming from the company side are actually depending on the land, the water, and the natural resources for their day-to-day living. And they might already have a vision on how they want to manage it. So being really careful about how do we build mutual trust in terms of that this is a shared vision for the jurisdictions, that the external partners are not there to sort of disrupt local interests or local needs are critical. And this roadmap, I think, is a good start. Now, jurisdictions currently are prepping against multiple benchmarks. Justin, LTKL have summarized the current benchmark of sustainable jurisdictions within our own regional competitiveness framework. And we found that there are currently more than 10 benchmarking for what is a sustainable jurisdictions. Now, what we need is a clear market signal as well, that there are actually lights at the end of the tunnel in terms of when jurisdictions are progressing, then there are credible incentives for them. Whether it's a better investment opportunity, or is it a larger trade, or is it joint program on smallholders? Hopefully, we really hope that in terms of implementation, the CGF roadmap would be able to touch this. Now, the strategy already touched on exciting new things, I feel. It touches upon policy, touches upon carbon markets, driving more demand for forest positive product, all the things that we cannot imagine talking about a decade ago, potentially. In reality, this is what the district are struggling, right? They're trying to figure out how do they provide tangible benefit for their community, their constituent on the ground, if they choose the path of sustainable development. For a district in Aceh, for example, in West Kalimantan or in Riau, with vast peat or forest ecosystem like the one behind me, this means exploring nature-based community business that are also focusing on value-added product. And this is not, something that is a sort of a peanut in terms of size. We're talking about, natural honey, which projected global value reach almost 15 billion US dollar in 2025, or local spices like moringa that almost reached $10 billion in 2024. Now connecting those with existing ecosystem services, appetite of impact investment, and the power behind the membership of CGF, including on carbon business, for example, we think is the way to go. Our board, an hour ago, have just been awarded by the World Economic Forum as the Sustainability Pioneer and Schwab Social Innovators. This is a company that deals with strictly peat ecosystem restoration and protection, and they're able to mitigate climate change, they're able to take care of their people, they're able to actually make a profitable business out of it. So we believe that this roadmap is actually an exciting starting point to try to embark all this new opportunity, and it's very exciting for us to work together with the members.
Thank you very much, Geeta, and I think also highlighting the potential for future markets and other opportunities for smallholders on the ground in these forest economies. We're running a little tight on time, and we've got lots of great questions from the audience. So I know there's one really important issue around how we will prioritize labor issues in the agenda. And Dave, I wonder if you could provide a perspective from Unilever on that.
Yeah, look, I think it's a critical issue, and we are looking at the whole forest ecosystem in this work, and doing our part to promote and protect multiple interests is really critical. And those include forest, the environment, people who live, as I said before, and make their living near forests, and the challenge of feeding a growing planet. This includes ensuring that working conditions in forests comply with the CGF priority industry principles against forced labor. The 3 principles I'm sure everyone's aware of. Every worker should have freedom of movement. No worker should pay for a job, and no worker should be indebted or coerced to work. So yes, we're looking at the full ecosystem, and it is critical to do so. Labor issues are at the core of the new business practices that we will be implementing.
Very good. And so another question, Dave, and this relates to one of the elements of the roadmaps that Dave outlined earlier. But how are you going to report progress and be more agile? And this also, there's a question in the Q&A as well about the interim milestones. But how can we measure progress with all these new commitments?
Was that to me, Justin?
Sorry, to Arjun.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it. Walmart will report through our annual environmental social governance report on our broader sustainability initiatives, as well as our new 2025 forest policy, which we just announced. And as the CGF Forest Positive Coalition continues to be refined, we will continue also to support and align reporting. So this is how we're going to report our progress.
Very good. So I'm going to shift to this last area that we wanted to cover, and then to get to some of the great questions that were coming in from the audience. Again, I'd encourage the audience to post your questions in the Q&A, and the team are trying to sift some of those out. But so the last section we just wanted to cover, and it's been a theme throughout, but is on collaboration. And it's clear that you recognize that the role the Consumer Goods Forum or the consumer goods companies have played in deforestation, but also the limits of individual actions. So what can the coalition achieve and by working together? And I'd ask that question first to Dave. And beyond, beyond the companies.
Yeah, I think many people have said already in the last half hour that unfortunately alone, no, we can't do it. We need to get much better at working with multiple parties. It's clear that we're going to need action from all elements and all sectors to really make a difference and to really address the underlying drivers of deforestation. So we need to get better at working with governments. We need to encourage, support political leadership on the environment. No amount of corporate commitments alone or data platforms will substitute for the power and authority of governments in this equation. But both can be leveraged to help governments develop forest protection laws and then enforce them. So we see it as multiple partners working together.
Very good. Arjun, the same question to you.
I mean, I fully, agree what Dave just said, right? I mean, the need for collaboration is absolutely there. The complexity of today's global supply chains, and of course, the systemic nature of issues like climate change requires collaboration among many stakeholders. It's not just, again, retailers and suppliers. It needs to be much bigger. Progress, our view, requires us to act and behave differently. And it demands innovative practices and regenerative ways of thinking, from businesses, suppliers, NGOs, consumers, everybody, right? I mean, it's going to be a holistic approach. That's our view.
Very good. Geeta, the same question to you, please.
Yeah, I think I touched upon a little bit in the beginning, but I guess from our side, the way that we look at it, collaboration is something that is not a one-off situation. It's something that needs to be continuous. It needs to be maintained. It's not an easy process. And at the end of the day, we need something to keep everybody motivated to be consistent in their journey. Now, if we were to recognize this collaborative journey to be a 10-year process, for example, we need to make sure that throughout each year, we can connect actual performance with tangible incentives as motivation, as different as it may. Now, because it has to be intrinsically linked to the performance, it touched upon the question before in terms of reporting. So going forward, collaboration should not only stop at individual level of reporting, it should actually be integrating the actual reports that right now everybody are producing. So it's not about reaching KPI of specific companies or government, it's actually about sharing progress based on the shared targets and contribution that everybody agreed beforehand. So this type of joint reporting is actually something that we can aim for a tangible proof that collaboration is in fact taking place, because it means we agree on a same data set, we agree on the same benchmarking exercise, and we agree about how to measure success and how to measure failure.
Super. It's an extremely important point. It's a point the Tropical Forest Alliance gets frequently in terms of the support for the coalition. There's lots of excitement about the coalition, but measuring and tracking progress, we think, is going to be super important and one of the challenges of the original commitment. So we're going to shift into the about 10 minutes now we have of question and answer. And we won't get to all the questions, but the first question has come up about the significant efforts that are now underway, particularly in some of Europe, around legislating for imported deforestation. And the question from the audience that's been pulled out is whether the companies in the new coalition are going to be actively engaging in positive advocacy to think about how governments can legislate in key demand countries. And so, Arjun, you already touched on that. I don't know if you want to talk about Walmart's engagement in the advocacy space, but that's the first question that I would ask, perhaps both Arjun and then Dave, if you have any reflections on.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen that we have announced yesterday, our position to go even more bolder on our, deforestation plan. So we really want to move forward on that, and working together with suppliers, working together with other stakeholders. Again, we are advocating collaboration and working together with everybody. So again, alone make it happen. So and we are happy also to work with with all the NGOs on that respect, to steer us in the right direction, and then we will make our strategy based on that.
Thank you. Dave.
Not much to build, to be honest. We think collaboration is key. We think setting stretching ambition is key. And we think transparency and traceability through technology is key. and that garnering partnerships and collaborations with people in the ecosystem is really important. Government is playing a very large part of that included. So all of that we welcome.
Great, and I should say as well that the TFA has been working very closely with a number of the coalition companies. About 10 of the companies have engaged really strongly in providing input to the European Commission's process for thinking how they're going to regulate on imported deforestation. I think it's one of the most important contributions that companies can make is to bring that positive voice into these discussions. So we have another question here about how all of this is going to impact smallholders on the ground, what more companies can be doing to support the smallholders in palm specifically. So let's not go into some of the other value chains, Peter, that you touched on, but how particularly land documentation can be included in this, and the work that the companies can be doing to support the action on the ground. So I don't know whether Arjun or Dave, you want to talk about that. I'm sure Geeta's got something to say on that, of what's needed.
So let me kick off. So smallholder engagement, inclusion, and development is, we fundamentally feel critical and fundamental. They are the stewards of the land. They're the stewards of this first mile of these extremely long chains across the world. So integrating them in our value chain, ensuring that they're empowered, ensuring they're acting within a clear legal framework is really critical to ultimately sustainable land use and in protecting forests and biodiversity. So as part of that, land rights, promoting decent working conditions are all going to be key for that smallholder development and ultimately key for forest protection.
Very good. Geeta, I'm sure you have a perspective on what needs to be done to the many smallholders in Indonesia.
Yeah, I mean, just echoing what David just mentioned in terms of having forest protection and community rights, including smallholders, be hand in hand is critical. We cannot say that we're going to be forest positive unless smallholders are protected in terms of their land rights as well as their operation rights. Right now in Indonesia, we're starting off coming from the mapping exercise, first and foremost, just getting to know where the smallholders are, but it doesn't stop there. Even if we want to pursue to the next level where they are practicing sustainable agriculture, there are multiple processes that needs to be in place before we can actually do a joint initiative between government program and private sector program, as well as development partners programs. So looking at it from a jurisdictional lens, we can actually do more if we talk more to each other. We have seen in different jurisdictions where multiple smallholders group, because they are the ones that are more ready, are the ones who get the support the most. Meanwhile, the ones that are actually quite difficult in terms of position, for example, they're operating currently in a forest area because they didn't know that it's illegal. Those groups are actually the one that needs attention the most, yet because it's so difficult to actually work with the current ecosystem, people tend to shy away. And in a way, if we're talking about forward looking, I think addressing those groups who are stuck in the middle would be actually critical. And it's exciting how CGF is embracing policy work, because one of the critical solution for that part is actually working with policymakers.
Very good. And sorry, go ahead, Arjun.
If I may build on that. So, I mean, this is why we are in this coalition of action, right? I think this is why this could be a game changer, not just Walmart and Unilever, but all of us, also with the Geetas of this world, that together, we can make this work. The smallholders are, of course, an important piece of the whole puzzle. So I think this has never been done before. It was always, a few companies working together. This is now such a broad coalition of action that I'm excited that we're going to move forward faster and better than ever before.
That's very encouraging to hear. One of the things that concerns me is if the big companies can clear up their supply chains by working with the biggest producers and ensuring everything's sustainable, but then we leave the many thousands of smallholders out of the supply chains, then we may solve some of the environment problem, but we exacerbate an inequality problem. And so again, I think this coalition has the muscle now and the collaborative spirit to actually address some of those problems. So that's something I'm also very excited about. So we're going to keep going with another question. We're just waiting for the minister to join for the closing. But there's a question here that I'll read out. It says, the more you peel back the layers of the onion in supply chain, the more you uncover issues that you didn't know existed. And I'm sure that's been part of the last 10 years of experience for all of the companies. So in terms of transparency and accountability, to what degree is the coalition willing to share all of the information, the warts and all? So it goes back to the transparency question that Dave, you touched on as one of the key pillars of the coalition, or the commodity roadmaps. So Dave, I don't know if you want to start.
Look, I think for all of us, it starts with the consumer, and the expectations of the consumer increasingly are going to be for that transparency and traceability to happen. And of course, there is a reality as you peel that onion. You may find things that you didn't want to see, but it's our obligation to do that. You know, we strongly believe it's our obligation to know exactly which field, which farmer we're sourcing things from, and not to work only with certification schemes that allow us not to know that. So on top of certification schemes, we know exact sources, and only then will we know exact impacts of deforestation, exact social rights. So it's really fundamental that we embark on that journey, that we do peel the onion fully back. We use technology to really help us do this with speed and do it with accuracy, and do it with leverage. Back to Ariane's point right at the start, you know, the more leverage, the more collaborative we can be, the more open we can be, the better.
Thank you. Ajahn, to you as well, please.
Yeah, I mean, we have learned over the past that, you know, going further upstream, as we call it, you know, we learn so much more of the supply chain. In the past, we were buying, you know, from just the supplier. We didn't, you know, always know where goods were coming from. And now we have to, right? I mean, so we are peeling the onion, and we are glad that we are peeling the onion, because we learn more. And you know, if we want to create the trust from the final customer, you know, we need to be very transparent. You know, we cannot hide things anymore. Today's world is so open. The new generation demands transparency, right? I mean, and we need to make it happen. So this is the new norm, I would say.
Agree more. Geeta, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think what needs to be highlighted is, like, also based on our experience right now, the part of the reporting and transparency that everybody are struggling with is actually the social indicator side. This is something that cannot be solved by remote sensing, for example. This is something that you need to spend time and resources to go on the ground and go actually invest on process. Now, whether or not we can actually solve it by working together, I think it should still be a prioritized item under the CGF new pathway, because it hasn't been figured out. I think smallholders are the one that people are concentrating the most, but outside of that, we have multiple other rights holders that are still struggling to be recognized in terms of reporting. And the second part of it, maybe Justin, if I can add, is that what is needed, at least we are experiencing it as well from the jurisdiction side. It's not only about reporting the status quo, but reporting the fact that you have an action item to address a lot of the challenges that appeared from that report, and also consistently reporting on how are you addressing those challenges, I think is what needs to be highlighted.
So I couldn't agree more. And I think it's also worth just pointing out how much remote monitoring, sensing has advanced in the last 10 years, we can see and know things now that were impossible to even imagine 10 years ago, and how companies are now using those tools. And again, the CGF Coalition will be looking to push those, I'm sure, to the forefront. But as you're also pointing out, Geeta, that the satellites can't actually see the land rights and the issues of the social issues. So I think that also is part of the frontier of where we're going to need to be working as we peel back these layers of the onion. I like that analogy. We're hoping the Minister is going to be with us shortly. So with that, I'd like to ask each of the panelists maybe just to provide a minute of your reflections and what excites you as you look forward about where this agenda is going. So Arjun, maybe to start with you.
Yeah, as mentioned before, that the fact that we are in this great coalition of the willing, I call it, right? I mean, great companies working together, and with all the NGOs, you know, governments. I think this group is now going to make really big moves in the right direction, as opposed to, you know, smaller groups of companies working together, or even on an individual basis. So we are excited, and that's why we are in this CGF coalition. So this is what I want to share again.
Super. Well, thank you for all you're doing at Walmart. Dave, a very quick reflection from you.
Yeah, look, I think the critical words of collaboration, stretching goals, not the lowest common denominator, transparency and traceability are going to be absolutely critical. We've all sort of touched on them, both on the nature and forest side and on the social side that Geeta was emphasizing. I think it is exciting. The leverage capability and potential is really exciting of the group.
Couldn't agree more. Geeta.
Yeah, I think what is most exciting coming from our side is that this actually shows sustainability is for everyone. It should not be seen as a burden. It should be seen as an opportunity to benefit from. Now, because of this, we need to really recognize that the ability for any stakeholders to claim any benefit out of sustainability comes really hand in hand with the fact that they have rights or not. The forest positive scenario will never happen unless local rights are really recognized, upheld, and actually included throughout the process of implementation. Our organization, LTKL, and I'm pretty sure all of the jurisdictions will be excited, and we really look forward to work together with the CGF and the TFA members to ensure that this happens not only on paper, but actual tangible manner within our jurisdictions, where local champions actually owns the targets, they own their sustainable future. And because for us as a coalition, process is equally as important, if not more important, than the targets itself.
Thank you so much, Geeta. And thank you to all the panelists for a really rich discussion as we launch this Forest Positive Coalition of Action. So it is my enormous pleasure now to introduce the Right Honourable Lord Goldsmith, who is the Minister of State for Pacific and the Environment, but I think most importantly for this conversation is the champion, has been a champion for the environment, for nature for many years, but is the champion in the run-up to the critically important climate summit, COP26, in Glasgow next year. And particularly relevant for this, Lord Goldsmith, is that we have 17 of the world's largest companies, $1.8 trillion of sales, committing to the next level of action on supply chains, which I know is something that's very important to your campaign and to what you're looking to achieve for Glasgow. So we're very excited to hear your words and how we as a coalition can be supporting what you're trying to get done.
Thank you so much, Justin, and thank you everyone for having me on today. Catching the last bit there, I'm beginning to wish I'd joined earlier, but I apologize that I was unable to. Things are pretty hectic at the moment, as you can imagine. But it is nevertheless a real pleasure to be speaking to you now about how we can work together to make forest recovery part of the solution to the biggest challenge we face. The pandemic has caused a real shock to global agriculture and to food security, and I think it's exposed numerous underlying weaknesses in markets. And it's also brought the importance of our relationship with nature into sharper focus. And we've long known that ecological damage, the illegal wildlife trade, the consequent increased human-wildlife interactions, all increase the risk of pandemics. But pandemics, of course, aren't the only risks that we face from our misuse of nature. Only last week, we saw in the horrifying Living Planet Index that populations of key species have declined by a staggering 68% since 1970, which is a little bit longer than I've been alive, a nanosecond in evolutionary terms. The scientific predictions in relation to climate change are increasingly dire. We know that even if we manage to get to grips with cutting our emissions, disruptive change is still going to happen. So even with 1.5 degrees, for instance, we still risk losing between 70 and 90% of our coral reefs, on which, let's not forget, 1/4 of marine species and about 500 million people depend for everything from food to coastal protection. And as we destabilize the climate, we're also, in some cases, fatally undermining Earth's natural systems. So more than half of the world's agricultural land is now degraded, and the diminishing yields are going to hit 500 million small farms the hardest. By the time I finish speaking to you now, we will have lost the equivalent of 150 football pitches worth of forest. Now, those forests are home to 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. They regulate our water, our climate systems, and they underpin the livelihoods of over 1 billion people. And their destruction is the second biggest source of carbon emissions. So the need for ambition, the need for collective action has never been greater. And as COP26 presidents, the UK government is encouraging governments and civil society and cities and businesses to step up. And a big part of that is encouraging donor countries to contribute more resources to nature-based solutions to climate change. There's no pathway to net zero emissions without protecting and restoring nature on an unprecedented scale. We think nature-based solutions can provide about 1/3 of the most cost-effective solutions that we need by 2030, but they attract only 3% of global climate investment, and that makes no sense, and that needs changing. In the UK, we are putting our money where our mouth is. We've committed to doubling our international climate finance to 11.6 billion. And more importantly, I think we're committed to allocating a significant proportion of that to nature. But all that aside, we know that public money alone is not going to be anywhere near enough for the task that we face. So in addition, we need to work together to tackle some of the perverse incentives around deforestation that outweigh incentives to protect forests by about 40 to 1. In fact, some people put the figure much higher than that. The top 50 food producing countries, for instance, spend around $700 billion every single year in support for often destructive land use. And if you add it up, that's about 4 times bigger than all of the world's aid agencies combined. Now, in the UK, we are already in the process of removing damaging subsidies and replacing them with a system that rewards environmental stewardship. And we're encouraging other countries to make similar commitments. The biggest cause of deforestation by far is agriculture, and in particular commodities. And I'm sure you have discussed this already before I came on. Almost half of global deforestation is the result of illegal clearance for commercial agriculture. So the government here in the UK is taking steps now to ensure that the commodities we import are not contributing to that illegal deforestation. We're consulting on a world-leading new law to clean up the UK supply chains, to clamp down on illegal deforestation. Our legislation that we're consulting on would prohibit big businesses operating in the UK from using products grown on land that has been deforested illegally. And we're very, very keen to hear from as wide a range as possible of stakeholders, both here in the UK and internationally, because we want to get this absolutely right. So I want to encourage anyone on this call with an interest, and that will be a lot of people on this call, please do submit a response by the 5th of October. And I have to say, so far, that the engagement we've had with some of those bigger businesses who would be affected by this legislation has been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, I could almost go so far as to say that the government is responding to pressure from some of those big businesses to clean up supply chains and create as even a playing field as possible. It's a very, very positive and healthy dynamic. Now, finally, we know that as government, we can't do this alone. Change of this sort and on the scale that's required requires really deep and genuine partnership between governments, businesses, civil society, and very close collaboration between different countries, producer countries, consumer countries, rich, poor, north, south, east, and west. We need a really macro collaboration, big alliances. So in the build up to COP26 and beyond, we'll be getting key producer and consumer nations around the table. We want to accelerate a global shift towards sustainable land use and commodity trade. And again, I invite businesses on this call to join the effort. It is a really critically important piece of work that we're doing, and it will only work if we build as broad an alliance as possible. So please do join. The UK government has been supporting public-private collaboration in this area for many years through collaborations like the Tropical Forest Alliance. We've committed £120 million to Partnerships for Forest, working with the Tropical Forest Alliance on a range of projects like sustainable rubber, sustainable honey in Sumatra, for example, supporting livelihoods and saving elephants and tigers and orangutans and preventing deforestation. And all of these projects, and there are many, many more, and I'm sure you've discussed other inspiring projects already today, all of these projects collectively show that we can increase production while at the same time restoring and protecting ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, reversing biodiversity loss, and benefiting farmers and communities. We know it's possible, but the fact is that we still need to scale these examples up rapidly. And as we do it, I think we can be confident that we are answering the call of consumers. We know that UK consumers are increasingly concerned about sustainability. And it's not just the kids on Fridays. Much as I take my hat off to many of them, I don't always agree with all the strategies, but they're raising an important issue. Likewise, some of the more sensible members of Extinction Rebellion, it's not just them. This is not a niche concern. It goes way beyond that. And the companies whose representatives are on this call now will, I think, confirm that the message we're getting from consumers is we want action. So I just want to end by thanking you for coming together today for this launch. It is, for me, and I know my colleagues, it's reassuring to see that there's such a big appetite to be part of the solution. So thank you very, very much indeed for your work. And I apologize if I kept you waiting at the start.
Thank you, Lord Goldsmith, for joining us today. We are honored that you were able to join, and we really appreciate your insights, your urgent call for action, and your invitation to collaborate. That's very much what this coalition of action is all about. So we definitely are interested in continuing the conversation with you in the lead up to COP26. I just want to say quickly to everyone who's on we will run about 6 minutes over. So if you can stay tuned and stay with us, please, we would really appreciate that. We appreciate your time, interest, and participation. So I just wanted to take a final moment here just to reiterate what you've heard from the panel today is reiterating our commitment that as a collective is to become forest positive businesses. We've learned a great deal together in the last many years working together. We're taking this issue very seriously. We hold ourselves accountable to collective action and the partnerships that's necessary to realize and advance meaningful progress. And I think that's part of the power of this coalition, is to be able to hold each other accountable. Our commitment to transparency and engagement with civil society is steadfast. I'm happy to announce that we will soon launch a public online engagement platform allowing for two-way dialogue with civil society for the first time. This is a large step forward in the collective transparency that we will all are interested in and will benefit from. And so please look out for this first of its kind platform, which we'll be launching at the Sustainable Retail Summit on October 15th. Bertrand, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And thank you again to Justine, our panelists, and Lord Goldsmith. I think it has been a great session, and I hope it has been very clear for all of you, and you fully understand that we want to work collectively. But before we close, we want to share another short video with you. I hope it will work very well. And we have a message from each of the 17 companies that have committed to becoming forest positive businesses as part of our coalition. And we hope it helps to show our concrete collective commitment. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch very soon. Video, please.
Deforestation is continuing at alarming rates. All parties need to be held accountable.
In response, the Consumer Goods Forum, alongside 17 of the world's leading consumer goods companies, has founded the Forest Positive Coalition of Action.
We believe forest protection is a driver of economic growth. It is not a sacrifice to growth.
We recognize forest protection provides healthy ecosystems and support productive landscapes and resilient communities.
Our ambition is to move from large, future-looking commitments to a more actionable strategy with clearer milestones and a more robust measurement framework.
So how can we achieve our goals?
We'll play a leading role in building a forest-positive future by working with all stakeholders that can make change happen.
We'll work with suppliers, traders, investors, governments, and civil society to transform the industry.
We'll partner with multiple stakeholders to drive sustainable practice throughout the world.
We'll advocate for and support practices and policies that will change behaviours and outcomes, such as promoting sustainable growth and finance.
We'll engage with suppliers and traders and ask them to implement forest-positive practices.
We'll be transparent and hold ourselves accountable by regularly reporting on our progress.
We will collectively promote and protect forests, the environment, and the people who live and make their living near forests.
We'll address social challenges by working closely with the CGF's Human Rights Coalition to advance the CGF's forced labor resolution.
And we, as CGF members, will mainstream priority industry principles against forced labor.
We'll work to balance forest conservation with positive social outcomes.
We're taking collective action to create a forest-positive future.
We are committed to being forest-positive businesses.
But we can't do this alone. We need your help.
Terrific. That concludes our program. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you again to our esteemed panelists. Appreciate all of and Lord Goldsmith, thank you for being with us.